Ahoy there, Elder Scrolls Legends fans. I am the Dead Broke Nerd, and after this weekend, it was an awesome weekend. Great games being played in the Last Chance qualifier. I was pretty busy Friday, Saturday, Sunday doing stuff, in real life, but also trying to prep for casting that. So I didn't actually get to put out a video with my thoughts on the balance changes. I want to do that now because content, but also I do think I bring a blended perspective of both a bit of the competitive scene, as well as somebody who, being a definitive Johnny and wanting to innovate and do goofy, interesting stuff. I'm a big off meta fan. I like to take synergies and themes and try to make them as good as possible. And so I kind of wanted to look at the balance changes from that side of things, as well as from the side of the competitive tournament scene, because I'm sure there's plenty of ideas out there from plenty of very skilled players about how these changes will impact the competitive scene. But I really did want to talk about my thoughts on how it will affect this massive divide that we see between meta and off meta, and what I think is important, which is to bring that a little bit closer together. So I wanted to sort of talk about these balance changes from that perspective as well. So it starts off with the Transitus Shrine, Disciple of Namira. So for those of you not aware by now, which, hey, maybe you didn't catch this, but it has been a few days. Transitus Shrine, now it doesn't just reduce all cards, it just reduces creatures and actions. So items are not going to be able to be reduced by the Transitus Shrine. There are some items that were used in the combo decks, like the Embassy Disguise, that could, continue cycling cards. But those will no longer be discounted. But I think the more important thing is that supports would no longer be discounted. This is where they said, we really don't want this coming back to bite us. We don't want somebody making a new version of this same deck. So we are going to make it so that it is vastly slowed down, even considering the Disciple of Namira nerf, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But I think that the biggest issue really was you could play these shrines. It would produce everything in your hand. You would infinitely cycle with Namira, or almost infinitely. But whenever you drew a support, like your Swindler's Market or your other shrines, you could just play them as well. Those were discounted as well. And that just made it a little too efficient. So we see this change in the Transitus Shrine, I think, just to really drive home the idea of this is not intended for combos. You're going to have to put a lot more work in if you want this to be a combo piece. What will this do for Shrine? I'm not sure. I'm tempted to say that Transitus Shrine could find a home in some sort of mid-rangey deck that wants to control both lanes, like a tokeny deck. But the thing is, of course, is that if you play like a token deck, the further it gets into the game, the more it doesn't matter how much the things cost, right? Because a lot of your tokeny cards, at least from an aggressive standpoint, are pretty cheap, right? So Transitus Shrine as a support competing for to get all those things out onto the board, you have this awkward balance where, like, okay, if I can play everything out onto the board and I'll run out of cards in my hand and my opponent hits me with an Ice Storm, Debilitate, Ready or whatever, So it's got to be in a position where either you really need to discount a OTK combo that's all going to come from hand, as opposed to cycling through the deck like we've seen before, which it does seem like the devs are okay with it being like I'm assembling combo pieces, as opposed to what they don't seem to like, which is I'm cycling through my whole deck until I win. So maybe we see Transitus Shrine in that regard at some point. So that's it. It's definitely a much worse card. It remains to be seen if somebody, and maybe I'll mess with it a little bit, can find a way to make it really good, but it will no longer be the driving force behind the most powerful combo deck in the game. So same thing over here with Disciple of Namira. At the end of the turn, draw a card for each friendly creature that died in Disciple of Namira's lane. Basically what this does is it completely guts the Empire Abomination deck, because you can no longer just infinitely cycle and deal damage by reducing everything down to 0. Like, that was already going to be pretty heavily hurt by the Shrine. Now it's even worse, because you have to wait until the end of the turn to draw the cards that the friendly creature that died. So I think this is still a good card, but this is not a great card anymore. And if you look down here, they talk about how they should have little impact on non-combo decks that use the card, like Doomcrag, right? So yes, Doomcrag I think was still viable. The issue is Doomcrag isn't as efficient at bailing itself out of a bad situation. If you think about the times when you've got your Doomcrag out on the board and you have your single Nord Firebrand and your Disciple in hand, what you could do is play that Disciple, play the Firebrand, swing it in, and hope to find something else that's helpful, right? You can find, a Sharpshooter Scout and kind of keep that chain going until you've managed to stabilize. Well, it's also a lot harder with one of the other nerfs that we're going to see, but the point is, you can still kind of get the value back, which is I play all these little things that are going to be able to remove my opponent, like the Firebrands and stuff paired with the Doomcrag, but unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to have that same impact as before because it's not going to draw. It's going to draw at the end of the turn, and so my ability to bail myself out, that gets a little bit harder. I don't know. I am not the most well-versed Doomcrag player. I haven't put as much time into as other players, but I certainly do understand when some people are like, this is going to hurt Doomcrag way more than they expect. I tend to agree. I mean, the efficiency of drawing it on the same turn is distinct. Lelangel Hexmage. I think this is a good nerf. I think this is really good. I'm reserving judgment on the other two as to good or bad. I mean, it was necessary. I want to say the first two, necessary. This is just good. And the reason why is Burn Assassin was too quick. Burn Assassin was too fast, okay? It could deal too much damage too early in the game. I mean, we saw some turn 6, turn 7, ridiculous combos. And then all it needs to do is get the opponent down to a small amount, and you can top deck a Lightning Bolt. If the Hexmage sticks, then that was always the part. If you can stick a Hexmage, you play one, you play a bunch of cards, do a bunch of damage, maybe you don't finish them off, but if the Hexmage is still alive and they can't deal with it, it's really, really tough. This halves the amount of damage that Hexmage's ability can do, which is absolutely monstrous. But I don't think Burn Assassin is dead. I think it just has to reevaluate how it's going to play. I think it needs to run more things like maybe like a Smuggler's Hall or something to consistently get 0 costs, as opposed to the idea of doing it all in one turn, like I'm going to stockpile, because it's way harder to do now. Sure, you can still have 2 Swindler's Markets and a Hexmage that you build up across the game and still combo from that same amount, because it'll all add together to be 2 to 3 points, per action. But I really think that this is great because it forces the Burn Assassin to slow itself down. It has to defend itself for a little bit longer now, and maybe it has to start playing the Swindler's Markets as you build up. Instead of just playing it right before comboing off, and maybe it needs to play these Swindler's Markets on curve and hope that it opens itself up for more support removal. So we'll see about that. I'm glad to see Burn Assassin taken down a peg, because it's one of the most infuriating things for unrefined decks to go up against on the ladder if you're testing something, a mid-range especially mid-range. Burn Assassin just can be very, very frustrating if you don't draw the aggressive side of things. So here comes my favorite change, and I know I am not necessarily in the majority, but I think that I do stand for a certain portion of the Elder Scrolls population that openly hates the way old Cast into Time worked. Here's the thing. Cast into Time was a necessary card when it was printed, and they talk about that, right? With Solitaire and Galen and Necromancer. All 3 of those things are very much prevalent. We still have, well, maybe not Solitaire. We still have Galen And if anyone who watched the event yesterday knows Galen can be pretty tough. And Necromancer. Necromancer is the best target for cast. But I think the issue is those Paarthurnax loops that we saw right after Heroes of Skyrim, that they're not being played anymore. There's other late game options that are being played. And here's the truth. Cast into Time neuters innovation. Cast into Time, it does not permit decks to innovate because it can remove combo pieces. It can identify, hey, what's my opponent doing? All right, you don't even get to play your own cards from your deck. I hate deck destruction as a mechanic. I hate hand destruction as a mechanic, and so I'm glad to see Cast in Time brought down a peg, because it doesn't even just box out combo, right? But it also really, really hurts mid-range, and we know that mid-range is having a hard time right now. Mid-BM and mid-Dagoth have seen some play in tournament scenes, but it can still struggle on the ladder at times, depending on the environments, the speed of aggressive decks, right? And I think that mid-range and anything that's not Battle Mage based has been struggling even more so, right? So like, Casting at a Time is a big culprit there. I only have so many cards in this mid-range deck that are of, high enough caliber, right? When I'm going up against Control, I need to be slamming the proactive threats on 5, 6, 7, 8, right? But if I play my first Blood Dragon and it gets cast, that's all my Blood Dragon. So dual color mid-range, I've lost, let's say 5-10% of the types of cards that I need to be playing against my opponent right now. Right? I need to be getting my beefy threat. So if I'm running, and that math might be wrong, may not be 10%, but if I'm running 3 Blood Dragons, 2 Cradle Crush, a Tel'Vas, and Ancano, and just a couple Belligerent Giants, if that's my top end, right? And all of a sudden, all my Belligerent Giants are gone. And then later, I play my Blood Dragon, all my Blood Dragons are gone. That's just ruining any chance I have of getting onto the board. It hurts those proactive plays. I mean, Cast in Time, it needs to be gone. It's extremely frustrating. It's a much better priced Javelin, although I've seen Javelins coming back for prophecy reasons, and that's a whole other discussion. But the point is, Cast in Time, it will now just banish, which means you can't recall it. It is still good against Cicero. It just isn't as good against Necromancer, and you can't use it to manually gut the opponent's deck, which in my mind is a good thing. Hlaalu Oathman. Man, I don't really know what to think about this, because all it does is it take those stats down 1-1. I hear a lot of people saying Hlaalu hasn't been touched, and largely I agree. I think Hlaalu, regardless of this nerf, is still very, very, very strong. And here's the truth. My truth. So it's not really the truth. My opinion. Here's my opinion. I think Hlaalu Oathman is much less interesting to play now. I don't want to say everyone will cut it, but I think there's a fair argument to cut it, right? Basically what Hlaalu Oathman is if you have those creatures on board, which isn't impossible to do, it happens quite a bit. People do have to construct their decks in such a way that, hey, I need to make sure I'm running something in the, red and green that is of a lower cost, so I can make sure Oathman isn't too hard to trigger, right? People are conscious about that, which is a good deck designing thing. But Oathman basically is a cantripping 2/2 for free. That's really good. A 2/2 that is free, right? And draws you a card. It's a great card. It has a lot of conditions, but it's a great card. But a 1/1, that starts to feel way less worth it. We've seen a big comeback recently of Skaven Pyromancer. Skaven Pyromancer has been back in a big way. And I think that the prevalence of Hlaalu, and it loves its tokens, I think, Crusader being that next big Hlaalu, at least in the competitive scene, I think Pyromancer has a great argument for being played, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think Pyromancer will still be around, and I just don't see Hlaalu Oathman. It's just, what's the upside? It's a free 1/1. I mean, I think there's better things that we can have. I'd almost at that point prefer to run a raiding party or something like that. Now, all of that said, what it does really help with is the plot effect. So the Balmorra Puppeteer loves Hlaalu Oathman, especially if you can get 1 or 2 copies down, right? It works really well with Divine Fervor. You get these guys down with the Divine Fervor, he's back to a 2/2. Right? So it's not that this guy has no business being there, but the payoff for the conditions is much less. And this guy has now stepped down from a 2/2 to a 1/1 and become an even worse top deck in the late game when you're fishing for an answer. This guy has become a pretty garbage card to see when you're looking for your, either more cycle. Although if you do have a red card, he does cycle. But if you're looking for more cycle, if you're looking for an Oculatus agent, whatever, I can see people experimenting with this guy cutting. I'm not going to say it's the correct call. I'm just going to say I can see it happening, and I will be experimenting without him. All right, Falkreath Defiler. I don't want to spend too much time here because I think everybody is mostly on board with this. At least everybody in the competitive scene knows Falkreath Defiler was an issue. Okay, this guy could come down, you could squish, you can immediately pull back the 8-drop that you discarded off of a camel on turn 4, right? I mean, there's a lot of issues with this. We saw it all throughout the the competitive Master Series qualifiers. This guy is just a disaster. The change probably renders him unplayable. I'd rather play a Solitaire. For what he does, you have to play 2 cards just to get the card back from the discard pile. Now, that is only if you are like basing this on, okay, I'm playing Falkreath Defiler in a control deck. If you, for some reason, want to play Falkreath Defiler in like a mid-range Slay deck, I mean, I can see that, right? Because he does get you a body. You can play him. Hey, if they don't remove him, I'm going to start slaying things, refilling my hand. That's not bad. But when it comes to Ebonheart control, I think Falkreath Defiler just dust in the wind. And I'm okay with that because I think for too long Falkreath Defiler has been it creates these ridiculous swings. Sometimes it comes down, gets instantly removed. But I think a lot of people will just start saving it for a squish, and on turn 6 they use it, they squish, or after ramping they use it with a rage, they clean up a small lane, and they basically completely flip the board state. There's nothing else in TESL that really does that, like the Defiler. It's a combo card, and really this guy needed to get put down a peg. He did. I'm happy. Let's move on. Archer's Gambit. Okay. This is the only thing I'm upset about. Of all of these, I really find that Archer's Gambit being changed from 2 mana to 3 mana is disappointing. And the reason why is it's another case of dual color getting punished for the sins of tricolor. Let's just compare this to the Goblin Skulk nerf, right? Skulk was the big problem in Telvanni because it was fishing Cruel Fire Blooms, which just really streamlined the ability for Telvanni to use those cards together alongside things like the Blackhand Messenger to basically just easily remove and mitigate pretty much everything that the opponent wanted to do in the early game turns because the targets for Telvanni to blow up for Cruel Fire Bloom were minimal, right? You play your Harpy, it's already got its good ability, which is the Shackle. Time to blow it up, Same thing with Wardcraft. I'll put a Wardcrafter on something I care about. Now I'll blow up the body. It doesn't matter. It's a small body that wasn't really going to go face. So that was the issue. It was also a really big problem in Hlaalu, right? Where you could play that down and start hitting face and picking up Nord Firebrands. I mean, that was ridiculous. But dual color green needed Skulk. Dual color green, especially aggressive dual color green. Archer, do you guys remember when goblins were actually legitimate? Like, goblins could actually win games because you could pick up the little 0-cost goblins and then buff them all with your 4-drop goblin. Like, that's the kind of thing that was really needed. Monk loved Goblin Skulk because you could go and pick up curses for a little bit of easy removal, or you could go and pick up Moving Shadows for some more movement tricks. I mean, the point is, Archer as a class needs Gambit, okay? Like, the days when Archer were absolutely dominating are way behind, not just behind us, way behind us, and they need Archer's Gambit. Here's why I think it got nerfed. 1, yes, it is ridiculous in Ebonheart, okay? And yes, it can absolutely help Ebonheart just destroy an early board state really early in the game, okay? Turn 4, you can go Fighter's Guild, Gambit. Turn 3 with the ring charge, right? If you put down a Fighter's Guild on turn 2, you can use Gambit and then still play a 1-drop, or still ring out another 2-drop. The point is, Gambit was great. Here's the problem. It slows down Ebonheart 1 turn. But that's not, like, Ebonheart doesn't necessarily need that 1 turn. And plus, it's still good, like, just as good. This is basically a crossbow now, right? It's pretty much better than crossbow in most respects. But this is just a crossbow now in the arsenal of Ebonheart. It's not really going to change the dynamic of Ebonheart. What's going to change the dynamic of Ebonheart is the Defiler, right? So, it slightly hurts Ebonheart. But I think the reason this is nerfed really is because Pilfer is getting pushed in a big way in this next set. And I think they're scared about what Archer's Gambit can do when Pilfer gets a lot of support, right? Because remember, Archer's Gambit has been used in the past to say, all right, I'm going to take Sails Through Storm, move over, ping face, get that sweet body on the board. Or, Quinral Burglar. Okay, before I swing with my Quinral Burglar, I'm going to move it and ping, and now I'm doing 8 damage when you didn't even expect that to happen, right? So that's why I think that this is going to be contextualized by the things that are going to come out in the future. And that's the main thing I have to say about Gambit, because I think I really don't like that. I would have loved to have seen the rise of Pilfer Archer, right? But that's apparently not going to happen, at least not. They want you to pay for that free Pilfer, so they're going to bump you up from 2 to 3. It's basically a Shadow Shift plus a crossbow now, and that adds up to 4, so we're going to -1 because it's dual color. Now it's 3. Archer's Gambit was an amazingly powerful card. Archer was not an amazingly powerful class. Same argument for why they didn't nerf Negation, which is Sorcerer would absolutely struggle if they didn't have Negation to fall back on. It just sucks that Tricolor abuses it. All right. Namira's Shrine. We're almost there, guys. Namira's Shrine. At the end of your turn, if you played 3 cards, draw a card. At the end of your turn, if you played 4 cards this turn, draw a card. This, I think, had to happen. And I think this had to happen because Namira's Shrine, for too long, has been too easy for decks to draw cards off of, especially because they often don't even have to think about it. They don't even have to iron out their deck really low so that they can make the most of this card. It's too easy for decks to trigger. Still look for it to pop up, maybe in something like a Control Archer, if that can ever come back. But honestly, with the Gambit, I'm not so sure. This now is a card you have to build around heavily, whereas before, 3 cards in a turn, that's not so hard. That's not so hard to do. So this had to happen because I think that had we seen those changes, right? Had we seen these changes to not Cast in Time, excuse me, Disciple and Shrine, have we also, especially, and I want to talk about the Falkreath, if Ebonheart's getting a nerf, Ebonheart being the thing that preyed the most on, like, Tribunal and Telvanni, if those get nerfed, then if Ebonheart has any reasonable decline in play, then they are going to see Tribunal and Telvanni rise up in a big way, with Namira's Shrine being the backbone, as it has been for a long time. So Namira's Shrine had to take a nerf. What we're going to see, I think, is a complete shift in the landscape of Control when it comes to how do they manage their resources. Okay, do they really trim down the list a little lighter and decide they want to still aim for Namira's Shrine? I don't think that's the way to go. I think Namira's Shrine is relegated to niche scenarios now, but I think that's okay because this card's been dominating for a long time. Does it go... you always run 3 camels now because you just need anything that can draw you the cards? We've seen Endora Mastermind nerfed, now the Shrine. I'm just really interested to see how Control will keep those resources flowing, especially when they hit, into decks like mid-range and other Control, where they're not getting runes busted every turn. Let's talk Dawnbreaker. Everybody's been calling this one for a long time. I don't want to waste your time with this too much, but I think it's a really good thing to +4/+4 slay, banish the slaying creature if it's undead. I think I talked about this a bit on stream. I think people are going to play a lot less of this card. That doesn't mean I think they should. I think what's going to happen is I think there's a lot of players who are going to look at Dawnbreaker and say, "Ah, man, I don't get to automatically destroy a Barrow Stalker. Well, I'll find something different to play with, right?" And I think if you're like a control-y deck that runs Dawnbreaker just purely because Dawnbreaker is the nuts, I think maybe you consider not playing this card. But 4+4+4 is really, really good. Picture this, this says if you have another creature, I'm a 4/4 charger. That's still excellent, and it outvalues a lot of other items in the game. I mean, compare this to Sentinel Battle Mace. Battle Mace gives the ward. This gives defense. You set up great trades with it. And it does have the kicker of if the slain creature is undead, it'll get banished, so that way it can't get recalled with Necromancer or Solitaire or something like that. I don't think the Slay is worth pretty much anything. But occasionally it might be very, very valuable. So, it's a kicker. It's meant to convey the flavor that Dawnbreaker has, which is a weapon forged to destroy the undead. It's still got that flavor, but the important part is the +4/+4. I think yellow decks that are aggressive still run it. I think mid-range decks with yellow still run it. We'll just see if people overreact to this card, and I would heavily anticipate a lot of players, especially maybe in lower ranks, overreacting and saying, "Oh, Dawnbreaker's nerfed, I'm gonna dust it," or "I'm just gonna not play it." And I think that's a mistake. But if we see some less Dawnbreakers charging into my face, I'm okay with it. But that's just a warning to anybody out there. Those are just my opinions on these 9 cards being nerfed. Moons of Elsewhere is coming out on the 27th. And these will go into effect alongside them. So big shifts in the landscape. I can't wait to see what everybody cooks up. I will be working on some videos playing with the new cards. Khajiit Tribal, here I come. But I thank you guys for watching. And I wish you the best of luck with this new expansion coming out. Take it easy, guys.